All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the November 15th, 2024 working group meeting. I'll start off with our new members. We have a few. However, I've been watching the everybody trickle in, and I don't think that any of them have joined us this morning. So hopefully we'll be able to get them to introduce themselves at another time.
Maybe,
Uh,
maybe I can do in the meantime introduce myself.
yeah, absolutely.
I when I first joined, I never had a chance to actually introduce myself. I was kind of busy with some getting some equipment out the door, but maybe I take the opportunity today to we're a machine builder, we're an automation company, and a few years ago we started some developments in the agricultural, did some mushroom robotics, and did some work now in the greenhouse. And we're just right now working on a project to do UVC radiation for strawberries. So that's going to be our next project that we're working on right now. We're just finishing off the rover right now at the moment, and we will be on the farm in March, April, whatever the next growing season starts. And we're going to have a program right now to apply UVC radiation for one full season in different aspects, different kind of radiation levels to detect how valid and how feasible it is, basically. But yeah, we're hoping for more projects in the agricultural industry, in the business, and see where else we can do with robotics and help out. Oh,
Where
by
are
the
you
way,
based,
company is
Conrad?
called Connexio. Sorry.
Where are you based?
Yeah, we're in London. We're here in London, Ontario, just on the east end of London, off Clark Road.
Excellent. Sounds good. Thanks
Yeah,
so much for the introduction, Conrad.
yeah. Thank you.
Appreciate you joining. Um, all right. With that, we'll move right into our discussion for today. You may have noticed on the agenda, we're not having one of our typical presentations, but we thought it would be worthwhile to have a discussion within the group. So I'll pass it over to Bridget if you'd like to get us going on that.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. So yeah, as Dan mentioned, based on some of the survey feedback that we got from everybody, we're trying to work a little bit more of roundtable type discussions into the meeting for today. So for the one today, we're kind of focusing broadly on the topic of data, and we have some questions that we'll be kind of asking everybody, but from there we'll kind of be going forward from that. So first question, we'll just ease everyone into it, is what are the upcoming opportunities that with regards to data in agrobotics and agriculture? And specifically, what technologies are you excited about either currently that you're working with or that you see coming in the next few years?
Might want to post that in the chat, Bridget. That was really fast and I caught half of it.
Okay, I will put it in the chat. And I will also mention as well, if you haven't raised your hand before, it's the little heart react button at the bottom of your screen. And then there's the option once you click on that to raise hand. So that will be how Dan is kind of picking who's speaking. So the first question has been posted in the chat. And I'll just repeat it again. So what are the upcoming opportunities with regards to data in agrobotics and agriculture? What technologies are you excited about in the next 5 years or so? You can talk about now as well. Give everyone a minute to digest.
You don't know the questions ahead of time. It makes you have to think for a second.
Friday morning at 9 a.m. is also like,
That too.
depends on how much coffee everybody had.
Come on, it's late. I've been at work since 7. I think I can I'll break the ice a little bit, Bridget, if that's okay.
Absolutely, Chuck.
I think that um, the opportunity for data in agriculture has always been, in my opinion, the so what. You know, like we collect data and people talk about data and data, you know, whether it's aerial imagery or drone imagery or plant scouting, yield data, as applied data, all of that stuff it's all interesting stuff, but it doesn't have any value and the farmers don't care about it. What the farmer actually cares about is the so what. And what the farmers are up against is that they rely on their own past knowledge as to what to do. You know, how much fertilizer do I apply? Do I apply a fungicide? In Conrad's comment, do I apply a UVC light to my strawberries? You know, but they're doing this based on past knowledge and past experience, and not based on anything that the current crop is telling them. Not for the most part. So the opportunity in data and where the value is going to come from is the so what. What can the prediction, being able to know 2 weeks from now that I'm going to need to apply a fungicide. Okay, that's where the opportunity lies. And then we can plan for that and project what needs to happen.
We had a comment from Chantel in the chat. She just can't connect to audio. I think the ability for new platforms to begin to connect to existing technologies will be imperative to bring all the data, new and existing, together and give it value, similar to Chuck's comment, using historical data to make current decisions.
And just to add on to that, I would say that I'm quite optimistic about AI, and specifically expert systems AI. So not general AI that scrapes the whole world of the internet, but systems that are designed specifically for, in our case, agriculture within a geography. So that, I mean, a good example of this, which is slightly done this way, is a new program called Perplexity, which is an AI system, but it's reference-based. So they don't just make stuff up. And so I think very quickly we're going to get AI systems that somebody's going to develop for a local area that is going to try and take the noise out of the data. And that I think is part of the problem, is that there's so much noise that nobody trusts the data on their local farm.
We had a comment from Ian in the chat that just said, data over information over knowledge. It's the knowledge that the users will be seeking, and it's up to us to collect the data and move it through information into knowledge that users can take advantage of. Robert, you had your hand up next.
Thank you. Just a quick comment is that we attended the AI for Food event there a few weeks ago. Dan was on it, and Joe and a few others of us. And I just found it interesting that every single conversation I was in about the application of AI all ended up being a big discussion about data. Who owns it? What about security? How's it going to be organized? Like every discussion. I just thought that was very interesting. And I think there's a lot of challenges that need to be met just on gathering, collecting, organizing, and maintaining security on data before it's going to be readily available for all these applications. And it seems like everybody's got a different opinion on what should be done about it. But I just found it interesting that that conference that had a focus on AI, but it all just came down to the data side of things, not so much about the applications and what can be done with it. So I think there's a lot of challenges out there that need to be addressed.
Andrew.
Morning, y'all. So as a startup person and as a farm kid, I'm going to kind of get excited about the technology. And from our angle, we're using cameras to understand the mechanical health of your machinery. So we put thermal cameras on your combine, see how it's functioning. Is it catching fire? Is there a mechanical fault? And as a kid, I saw tractors, combines burn up, right? That's exciting to me to see. Can I help stop that? Can I help cause the farmer to say, hey, I see an issue? And a big thing, a big mantra within our organization, going to that data comment, is I'm helping farmers harvest their data. A lot of farmers don't realize how much data they have hiding somewhere. And we're actually trying to build out a monetization channel for the farmer with their data, not just being like, I own this data. And we've recognized that over the years of like growing up in it and talking about it. And that's where I like to kind of talk when I'm around these kind of groups, like how can the farmer benefit from their own data instead of just being a big organization saying, I'm going to own this you can't do anything about it. And that's where I think there's a lot more excitement too coming, is farmers understanding they have the ability to understand what is possible with their data, or or any technology coming to their farm.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. Chuck.
I think related to some of what Andrew talked about, and just to add on to what I was saying before, the other excitement or the opportunity that we have is the ability to, and the machine is capturing data to be able to explain, what's been happening at that time. One of the challenges that we have with a camera that is taking imagery of a crop, for example, is we don't know what just happened to that crop ahead of time. Was it just sprayed? Did it just rain? Was there a hail event or whatever? A lot of the times the data is collected, kind of in a very static format. It just sort of exists. And so if we want to use the data to understand what's happening, we need to have the context. And so whether there's, like, it's fine to say that, you have a camera that's collecting heat data on a combine, for example. But you need to know that they were combining on a windy day. Was it 35 degrees outside? What direction was the wind blowing? How much load was the machine under for it to generate? There's the ability to capture that the context of what was occurring while that data was collecting is an opportunity that we have.
I see Dan from Untethered AI is on here. He's a new member. Dan, from the AI perspective, like, that's where we want to get to, is how do we make better decisions and have, use all this data and information and knowledge and all that stuff. First of all, welcome to the group. And can you give us a little bit of perspective from the AI side of things and the chip side of things?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. And we're a Toronto-based company. I think the biggest aspect, so most all the AI really began in the automotive industry. I mean, where we started, we're funded by JM Ventures, and almost the entirety of the AI stuff that's being implemented really is a derivative of what came out of the automotive industry. To that end, what that is an optimization process. We believe that the ag tech industry has a functional usage of AI stuff based on 25-year-old gaming technology called GPUs. I mean, it's just a happenstance that everything runs on NVIDIA stuff. It shouldn't. There's much, much better, more optimized ways. The presentation I gave at FAIR a couple of weeks ago, we compared one of our implementations on a laser weld weeder to Carbon Robotics. As you know, they've got a big NVIDIA investment in them, so they're carrying around a foot locker full of hardware on their tractor for no reason. We can do the same thing in one chip on one board, and that's what we're demonstrating. And my point is, it's not just the data, it's not just the applications, but it's the underlying hardware. All of that comes together. Somebody mentioned the ecosystem earlier. Models are in that. We're working with a bunch of modeling people. The regionality of that is really important, because from a hardware where we come from, we don't want to carry around a model that models all the weeds on the planet. We want a model that only pertains to the models in your area. Same with the crops, what crops are you using. So instead of having one big AI model full of data that we have to process every time we're trying to make a decision, we boil that down and optimize it into, here's one for Chuck, here's one for Kristen in Iowa, which is very different than what they're doing in Australia. So as far as data goes, I think that's kind of a broad category. It's like transportation. All the elements that come together, we can start optimizing them. It means your tractors will run faster. Example at FAIR we gave, the Carbon Robotics is doing 250 millisecond detection. That's how long it takes it to say, oh, there's a weed at this location. We do it in 7. Okay, so that's 30 times faster that you can process what are we looking at, they have one GPU per camera. So you got 24 GPUs in your box. We can do one chip, 24 cameras. So there again, less power, less cost, less weight. So it's all about getting the discussion on data is all about the entire AI ecosystem. You can't just fix one little piece of it or optimize one piece. You have to look at it as a whole. And that's what we're trying to bring to AgTech. Why I'm here today. We're engaged with everything from investors. We have a AgBox Alliance that we're going to have a kickoff meeting in December, where we're saying, like the computing world, like the automotive industry, AgTech needs to have some standards and open source stuff. It just accelerates innovation, reduces costs for everybody, and improves the final product to the farmers. So by us being semiconductor and computer people, we're saying we'll lead this alliance. The industry will end up with one standard AI computing hardware. You don't have to have that box. You can take a derivative of it because it's open source and free. But that allows you then to optimize the hardware, the software, the models, and that'll produce a much better system of processing the data. So sorry if I got on a tangent there, but that's kind of an overview of what we're doing.
That's exactly what I wanted you to discuss is just, there's data and then there's also technology that's leapfrogging itself. And we met Chris a couple of weeks ago at the AI event in Guelph. Dan and I had a good discussion a couple of weeks ago, and I'm glad he's able to come on here. And he's out in Colorado, so he's up at the crack of dawn, like Chuck. And so we need to keep an eye on, the whole technology ecosystem. I think Chuck told me a story about Emily was building a database of all the weeds. Chuck can't use it because I can't remember, they took it on damn iPhones and they didn't figure out, is that technology robust enough to throw into a database that other people can use? So yeah, it's complex. I think what we want to do is we want to eventually get to smart decision systems using all these new technologies, so it's faster, cheaper, easier for the farmer, and we get stuff done. So the result, I think, is the key piece here, not to get hung up on too many different things, even though it is a complex ecosystem.
Let me point out that also, it's a good point about we come from, in the automotive industry, reliability, which is just the most important critical format. I mean, we can't drive cars if we're not safe. Same thing in as it relates to farming is reliability. I grew up in Missouri, my wife's from Iowa. Lots of relatives that will tell you the thing has to work. It just flat out has to work. I don't have an IT department on the farm, da da da. So we're also professing that by taking this huge box of complexity and reducing it to a single chip and a single open source standardized design where all the interfaces are common across vendors, you get a more reliable system. You get a computing environment that is smaller, generates less heat, and you can actually afford to have a backup in the shed. So if you do have a problem, you swap one box, you're back in the fields. So reliability is a big part of what we're bringing to this.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan and Joe. Just going back to the previous discussion, as I said, saw that Daryl and Ian both had their hands up as well. And we will be touching in the next section on the challenges with regards to data as well. So for those of you who've kind of identified some of those challenges, we'll kind of be bucketing them and talking about those as well. So let's go to Daryl and then Ian.
Yeah, okay, thanks. I'll give a few thoughts from where I'm sitting in government the last number of years. And so one thing, like for programs that farmers apply to, they're giving up a lot of data to be eligible for the program. But that comes with, there's an understanding there that their data is going to remain confidential. So I think that, is needed in any sort of relationship with data in the private sector or government. I've heard of some vegetable growers that data is like seen as like we need data to make decisions, but I think a lot of the times it's collected and not used. I've seen some vegetable growers that are collecting yield data, for example, but I don't know how much they're using that when they go back and they calibrate their nutrient applications the following year or whenever. And it's come up with a lot of the soil testing, you know, I hear about grid sampling and all that stuff, and then yield mapping and then precision agriculture. But one thing I heard yesterday at the LRIC meeting in Elora was from a dairy farmer that said, you know, in order to get new technology adopted, we need to work with the 10% of the farmers, was her point. That they're the leaders, they're the innovators, they're the ones that are going to be the champions of something, but they're the ones that you want to work with because then they'll amplify the message of there's something new, it's good, you should use it, that sort of thing. So I've been thinking about that since yesterday, and I think this group is part of that 10%, right? So it's, and I think of the Innovative Farmers of Ontario as well. And so there's certain groups that are more attuned to this like aspect of data, but I mean, it's not without a lot of issues of confidentiality, ownership. And I think it comes back to what's the utility of the data for the farmer? Is it it's gonna help them? What's the economic benefit to them? What are they giving up to get that benefit? So that's just some thoughts. I don't know if it's helpful.
Thanks, Daryl. Yeah, that's definitely like as we kind of it's a huge topic to kind of discuss, but the in terms of like the data that's talking to other data or somebody who's collecting data, like I think part of that discussion is like it's a very overwhelming to just say here's all this stuff that the machine can collect if it's not somebody that's already trying to integrate that into their operations. Ian.
And I don't know now whether I should be talking now or you said something about we're moving into data because my comments are data related. So do you want me to wait?
No, you can go ahead. You've been waiting for a bit, so you can say.
Okay, so a couple of things. Let's step back for a second. I get very frustrated with this whole thing about data protection, and I'm not going to share my data because what could happen to it and stuff. And I want to refer to a book called Wikonomics: How Mass Collaboration Changes Everything. It was written by Tapscott and Williams in 2006, and it talks about how companies who were willing to share their data and put it out there so that other people could look at it and work with it and combine it with other things was tremendously advantageous to those businesses. We have scared the crap out of farmers around this whole thing about data and stuff, right? And we cannot have the successes that we want to have unless we have access to that data. And that data has to be available to us, but there has to be something in return to those data holders to make them understand that they're part of creating solutions that benefit themselves and others and look at it at a collaborative thing. I get really frustrated when some companies have created a problem, and governments have done the same thing, have created a problem that has shied people away from sharing data. And it's kind of hypocritical because in social media and everything like that, we're sharing data left, right, and center and not thinking about the implications of that. But then all of a sudden, in data that could actually benefit our businesses, we're holding back, and that's very frustrating. So I would read that little book. It's very good, and it maybe gives you a little bit a different perspective, and I'll put it in the chat. The second
Ian,
thing,
is it do they don't want to share the data, or is it they don't know how?
I think it's probably
You got
both,
to put it
Joe.
on a disk and you got to send it to Chuck, and and everybody's busy and they don't have an IT department. So, this time of year, so many of the farmers, the data dies on the combine, even though it's there and it's captured, but it's not connected to JD Operations Center, and so it's just too much work.
Well, and that's the second piece of where I wanted to go. And I've been in this game for 25 years doing applied agriculture research with farmers on farms in farm conditions and stuff. And something that frustrates me there, and when you do something like research or whatever, whether it's applied or scientific, you're going to generate a data point. And the problem is that data point valid or not? And if we don't do validation to determine whether this data that we're relying on is of value in terms of what we're trying to accomplish with it, we have a problem. And precision agriculture has been a perfect example of where the Wild West has been ripe and we've gone crazy with that. And just trust me, do this and you'll win. Well, where's the validation that shows me that we're winning? And I think that's extremely important. So as we move forward on the AgRobotics side of things, we've got to be able to show that. And part of that comes down to, and I'm glad we're involved in it, the conversations that some of us have been having with the Standards Council and stuff, because we got to have standards that people are going to work to and that allow validation routines to be created. So just think about a standard yield map, right? Yield map is just a pretty picture of a whole bunch of numbers in a spreadsheet behind that. It's the numbers that have value much more so than the maps, but we as people are very visually oriented in terms of learning things, and so we need to project things in a visual environment. But we've got to remember that it's that data behind that colorful map that is the tool that we need to work with. So data is extremely important, but data is not what's going to drive it. It's the knowledge that comes from that data. But that knowledge is tainted if the data that we're feeding into these knowledge systems hasn't been validated and corroborated in terms of the outcomes and stuff. And it goes back to somebody's previous comment a little earlier about well, I think it was you, Chuck, the metadata in terms of that data point is so crucial. And I would suggest that 90% of the time, the metadata, even if it's been collected, isn't used in the interpretation of that data. And these are things that I think the AgRobotics Working Group, through our joint activities and our broad membership, can help to support. So I'll leave it at that. Sorry if I took too long.
All right, all good. Thanks, Ian. And I think you touched on it, and I'll go to Chuck next. But I think the other side of it is the marketing of a startup company, right? If they're trying to sell a product, they're also selling this concept of like, hey, we can solve all your problems collecting that. And I think sometimes that's where the trust comes in for the producer as well, is like, I don't necessarily want to say I have all this data because I don't want someone else to turn around and sell it on me, and I'm losing even more control on my farm. Chuck, will go to you.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for someone who wants to pay me for my data. So there's and I think the reality is, and I've said this many times, is that the value of Chuck's data on his farm is zero. Like nobody cares. Like really, like it's the aggregation and the use case and the algorithms that get bitten. And Dan touched on that a little bit when he talked about making programs and things that are specific to that farmer. It'll be valuable to, at the end of the day, that data will has to get turned into something of value to me. My my data is most valuable to myself. And the idea of making that easy to collect and easy to monetize for myself in some way or shape or form is a good thing. I wonder if I could, I don't know whether Mark Srokas is listening, but another producer, he's in a different set than me, but I don't know whether I can pick on him to make a comment on his own farm. Whether he can, whether he's willing to talk about it, the data collection and what his thoughts are on this.
You always seem to want to pick on me, don't you, Chuck?
Well, you are a neighbor almost, so I gotta.
Yeah, like without a doubt, I agree that, hopefully AI is the answer to making some of this, if you have data that's useful, is to make it into something that you can use, because yeah, having a bunch of data there and not knowing how to analyze it or how to gain some benefit from it, I could see AI being the answer to that. That's about all I can say at this point. You have to see what the results are, I guess, too, to know how it's going to work for you.
So we had our event yesterday, and we had several apple producers out at it, and we were talking about data on a very small level, and that data was where did the sprayer drive in the apple orchard, and did the farmer actually know? And this is like so basic, like from a corn soybean production perspective, this is something we've had for 20 years. And and the whole idea of adding value to that farmer in the data piece is just being able to show them that yes, their operator traveled that path. This is the speed they drove. This is the amount of product that they applied. Is going to add value to that producer. It's not going to add value to their neighbor beside them. That data that was collected from those sprayers and what was sprayed adds value to that farmer, but not to their neighbor. The neighbor has no value to them. Okay.
Awesome. Thanks, Chuck. And thanks, Mark. We're putting you on the spot, so appreciate you contributing. We'll go to Sean next.
Good morning. Thank you. I am a research scientist with AAFC. Just to give some context about where my comments are coming from, I am a weed scientist. So as far as data, I often have to pay people to take my science and publish it. So I definitely feel about not getting any money for your data. Chuck. It's a very interesting world about how we disseminate data. But the repository of the data online, especially on cloud systems, is very, very interesting. And I think as our technology grows and our capacity grows, the more data we're going to be able to house online, and the more that's going to be open access. And that's the path, I think, where we're going to have more people around the world mining that data. And we're going to see a lot of interesting developments as we go forward. And Chuck, again, about your comments with forecasting. I'm very, very interested in that. And that, I think, is a very good avenue for building ecosystems on farmland that are going to be very resilient to pests. So very, very interested in those sorts of ideas. So
yeah, and I think that like the idea that Gecko Ag has on being able to trying to predict where the weeds are going to be, in the field. I think that's why that's of interest to producers, right? Because they're just like, hey, that's something I might be able to act on, right? And I think that's why it's they're gaining some traction.
Definitely. And Sean and Chuck too, it kind of relates a little bit to what Ralph has in the chat. Like he had just said, it's less a matter of knowing how to share the data, but also having access to it and having time to learn it. So having it in a digestible format. And so if you don't necessarily have time to go and look through all the data that's up in the cloud, having something that is a little bit more transferable from item to item or farm to farm, even if it is going to be very specific to that individual grower.
Well,
So
and Bridget, like the growers are busy, right? They don't, and doing data analysis sounds easy. Like we make it sound, oh yeah, we're going to process data, but it's actually a very detailed skill set. And being able to read and analyze data is just not something that everybody either wants to do or can do. And that's why the so what is so important. The action items are so important.
Yeah. So on that, so what, we are going to go to Andrew, and then our next kind of subset of this is how do we actually make that data. So looking at the challenges of the industry, one of the ones that's kind of been identified on the call today, but also ahead of time, is actually making that data transferable. So if you have a new robotic system that's coming into the field and it's in the field, the data that's coming out of that right now, I've heard even from Chuck, like when they're collecting it, it's somebody putting it into a spreadsheet or trying to have different systems talk to each other. So talking a little bit more about how, as an ecosystem, we can help make that a little bit more streamlined. But we are going to give Andrew a chance just to finish his comment first, and then we'll go into that topic. And I will put that in the chat.
Thank you, Bridget. I'll actually make sure to dovetail into that. I can dovetail it into
Fantastic.
that comment. And I'm going to give a bit of an insight because again, I am a startup. I am a business, and the best way I can start this is it's capitalism. Right. At the end of the day, is I'm a farm kid. I appreciate the ecosystem and I support it. But capitalism is actually also the big thing that hinders us with our data collection, data ownership. When I go raise money, I'm in Arizona right now raising money. And the first thing these investors ask is who owns the data? And I go, it's a partnership between us and the farmer. And some investors get really upset and walk away because they've lost their thing. And if John Deere decides, hey, we like what you're doing, we can maybe copy it, they're going to go do it, right? Like I spend thousands and thousands a day just working on patents and protecting things. And this is to help the farmers ecosystem, right? There's a bigger thing behind the scenes. And in Canada, I think we're a little bit protected by our government, by our institutions, by our co-ops. And as a business, learning all these things, I like to inform my partners of that big thing we're dealing with as well. And I'm kind of leaving that with you as a thought process to think extra, because if I'm a business and I'm taking all these data points and you want me to put it into a specific format, there's a cost. Someone has to pay the piper. And it's great to talk about one massive open system, but again, in 5 years, someone else can do it better and faster, more efficiently, and they're going to start charging for it. And then you're going to get people. And so that's the cycle of capitalism. So I look at it as how can I get as many farmers on board, low level producers, all that, to buy into it early. But it's something for you guys to think about is that there's always going to be that big machination behind the scenes and how we can work together, whether it's with startups or people like Dan, your group, to like help facilitate that and keep those things moving from that edge. That's my comment, just to make you think extra.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. That's a good point. And kind of, as Chuck had said earlier, no one wants to pay him for his data, but they'll definitely try to sell him his data because they have to still make money in their ecosystem.
Technically, I can. Technically, that's what I'm working on, is how can I pay him for his data.
Chuck's nodding, so seems like you have an interest so far. So yeah, I put in the chat that in terms of the next kind of challenge, so collecting the data, as you're kind of saying, Andrew, like how do we make this easier from an adoption standpoint? I did see that Steve had included some information that some AI generated, and I know somebody else had, I think it was Ian had touched on this as well. Like AI definitely helps with that generation, but if you were looking on a whole as the AgRobotics working group or ecosystem, like are there any tools that we could be doing or anything that we could be assisting to kind of make it a little bit more of a streamlined process? Might be a pie in the sky idea, but we'll throw it out there. So we'll go to Clifford first.
Put cameras everywhere. Put cameras everywhere you possibly can, because cameras will document everything, and soon we'll be able to label everything from software, and it will be able to critique what you're doing. It tell you if you're doing something that hasn't been viewed before. It's going to very much help you customize your set of softwares for your farm. So we need to help build data sets for future farmers, right? Let's be honest. That's what this data is for. It's for future farms. It's not for what we're doing right now. It's not for how we exist now. What we're doing now works to a degree. It works, but we need to improve it. We need to adjust it, and we need to do it differently for the future. So this data is building the foundation for future systems that will help our future growers. So putting cameras everywhere will allow us to document every possible situation from seeding, everything, right? It can watch a tank go down. It can watch a sensor explode, right? It can track anything that you want. So you don't have to have all these overlapping systems that someone needs to come in, label it, adjust it, and say, this is right or this is wrong. Let the cameras do the work. And in a couple of years, someone's going to have a solution that can label it properly. And then you're off to the races. Let the computers do the work at that point.
I would just swap out cameras for sensors.
What kind of sensors?
Camera's basically a sensor that's visual, right? So sensors, the Internet of Things. It's never been easier or cheaper to pull data on just about everything. So good points, Clifford.
Yeah, and to add to the reason why cameras is because if you have a camera on you, you can talk while you're doing the work. So you can label the work as you're doing it, right? Cameras usually have mics or audio detection on them. So that's why I'm favoring cameras. But yes, 100% other sensors will be great assistants, right? Like in-soil sensors, water sensors, etc. But camera-based systems are going to be the big piece here, in my opinion.
Thanks, Clifford, and thanks, Joe, for jumping in on that as well. Chuck, I did see your it's pretty funny, Andrew, the shameless promotion there.
Yeah,
Chuck.
that's okay to do a shameless plug. And I think too, one of the things that gets missed on the robotics that we've been working with is an understanding of how to maybe use that data in the background. So we have one of the robots that we use. It's very, very difficult to track where that robot has been after the fact, which you might find shocking, that to those of you that are in the system. But we've had to put trackers on some of these robots ourselves because we knew that we couldn't track them after the fact. And the engineers who built them, they will tell you that this is what they're trying to do, but they're so busy just making the robot drive straight, that they don't have the time and the processing power or the money to do something with that data. And and I think in almost every investor pitch that I see, the robot companies will say, "Hey, we're going to collect data as the robot is going to the field," but they're not actually. They're just telling the investors that that's what they're doing. And I want to echo that point that an easy and automatic way to collect data is going to be very, very important. And there's a reason why John Deere has JD Ops Center and why they put it on their tractors. And it's because it's done automatically and easily, and the farmer doesn't have to do anything. Interestingly enough, they can't charge for it. They haven't been able to monetize it. They do it all for free. John Deere Ops, all that stuff is free. And the other big one that's a good data collection system is Climate. And the reason why that's being used is because A, it's free, and B, it's super easy for the farmers to use. Like it's almost like a brain dead person can almost do it. And the reality of the data collection piece is that the robots have to do it easily and automatically. And I like the idea of the commentary, the vocal commentary for labeling after the fact. That gets back to my point of context. What has been going on while we're collecting this data? I think that's a great point that Clifford brought up.
Yeah, to Chuck's point, on the labeling side too, like I even think like if you look at like a nutrition label on everything, right? Like there's a standard from a nutrition label of what needs to be on, that kind of thing. But a company will still take that and say like, this is a fruit and veg is a really good example, right? An apple juice, it's really healthy for you, blah, blah, blah. But if you look at that nutrition label, it doesn't actually have anything healthy on it, but they're still using that to monetize on there. And so I think it's always a challenge with any product or with anything across the industry is like finding the balance of making it actually user friendly, but also companies are going to exploit it some way as well, as is their job to do. So it's a little bit of a challenge for us to kind of go through. I do see Dan has given me the warning. We are coming close to time for today. And we do have a few updates in terms of the other rest of the working group stuff. But I did want to say really good discussion today. We can have maybe one or two more people raise their hands if they want to have a point to share. And maybe this will be a discussion that we come back to, maybe bucket it a little bit more so we can kind of focus on one specific area. But this definitely gave us a good starting point for that. Anyone else to see? I did see David in the chat. Another tech breakthrough that is required for AI to work is an autonomous labeling system. So yeah, that would be definitely something from an industry framework standpoint that would be helpful. It's not that I have anything against fruit juice, Matt. It's more that an apple has so much more fiber in it than just an apple juice. That's all. You want people to eat apples. Ian.
It's not really related to the discussion, but it's related to the group. There's lots of people on here. Oftentimes in these sessions, there's a bunch of us that sort of take over the conversation, but I want to make sure that we encourage everybody to put their input into this. Like there's lots of great brains here that have lots of interesting and diverse experiences. And that's what the working group is all about, is bringing that network of people together. And, I'm a soil and crop specialist with the Ministry of Agriculture and Food. I don't consider myself an expert, but I consider I bring expertise to what I do. And I think that's true of most people. And so I just want to encourage people to pipe up and contribute when we're having these kind of conversations.
I think on our end too, we'll kind of have a little bit more as we look into topics like this. Maybe we break in everybody into breakout rooms too, so that I can put all the more opinionated folks that we hear from every week together, and then everyone else gets a little bit more of an opportunity as well. Not picking on anyone specifically, but that way as well, if there's somebody that's new to the group, they feel like they can still share something, because it can be a bit intimidating.
Don't worry, I'll call people out.
Thanks, Chuck. Appreciate it. All right, Dan. Well, I think we'll turn it back to you for the rest of the meeting. Thanks everybody that's participated today. It's very much appreciated. And you've definitely given us some topics that we can kind of come back and revisit as we look to more roundtable discussions and working those into the working group meetings. So Dan, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Bridget. Appreciate taking the lead on that discussion. We'll head into conferences, meetings, field tours, demos. There have been a few different events that have happened. There's the Kane networking reception. That was November 6th. Agriculture Enlightened on the 7th. Ontario Pest Management Conference also on the 7th. The Thrive Global Impact Summit on November 6th and 7th. As well as just yesterday, the Orchard Sprayer Demo Day. So I'd like to invite anyone who participated or had anything to do with any of those recent conferences or the demo to, if you have something to share with them or some comments on how they went.
Yeah, the Emily thing last week, I presented for Chuck on the Smart Farm in the AgRobotic working group out in Winnipeg. I think they had about 260 registrants. So one of the big topics was ag data and the same issues. Darcy from Farm Credit Canada and Todd Jansen, who's a lawyer out of the US, talked about the ag data transparent project. So some of those questions are starting to be answered, and companies can sign up for that. And there's a bit of a process started there. But good turnout last week. They want to work with Chuck. So we'll make sure, the ecosystem is expanding. Future things, I see Patrick Gossage is on. Dan, you might want to get him to talk about the AgRobotics conference coming up in a few weeks in Guelph.
Yeah, absolutely. Patrick, if you you want to chime in there and give an update on that.
Good, Dan and Joe. So our third annual AgRobotics conference happening at the University of Guelph. I believe it's in the Peter Clark. Dan, I'll send you some details on it that you can, if you wouldn't mind just sharing around with the group. This is very much a more the merrier. Our first two conferences we had in the order of between 150 and 200 folks, very much people that were already, I would say, drinking the Kool-Aid in terms of AgRobotics, sort of early adopters. And I should say, for those who aren't familiar with the term, AgRobotics is, I feel it's a somewhat overly technical sounding term for something that's a very, very simple concept, which is combining solar and farming as opposed to solar or farming. There's a number of different flavors which will be discussed at the conference, and we'll be discussing policy across Canada. So from BC to the Maritimes, we've got representation. There's a lot happening in the space right now, very, very topical, in particular in Ontario, where there's a massive call for power, the largest in the province's history, and also very, very topical in Alberta. I was just at the CanRIA event in Alberta. There's some conflict over siting of renewables and building of energy infrastructure. And we see agrivoltaics as a nice way to thread the needle, put more money in farmers' pockets, allow them to continue the proud farming heritage tradition, and generate energy for themselves to power these smart farms, and power AI data systems. I'll stop there.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Patrick.
Patrick. And Dan brought up the orchard demonstration that happened. We were a little concerned yesterday with the rain, but by the time it was the presentation was over, the rain had started. So we actually had pretty good weather. We had several producers out, and they represented probably about 50 different spraying units that go into apple orchards across Ontario. And we had some pretty good discussions on kind of how the systems work and how orchard spraying is done and what some of the gaps are, especially on the quality control, data processing, and how machines are looked at. And so it went well. We were very happy.
Excellent. Glad to hear. It's too bad we weren't able to make it out. Perfect. Thanks everybody for all those meetings and conference and day updates. It's really appreciated. Especially for the folks that weren't able to go to some of them. Jumping onto that, on Tuesday and Wednesday, Bridget and I, as well as Thomas from Haggerty, we had a booth set up at the Level Up Skilled Trades Ontario event, which was actually hosted here on our site at the Western Fair Agriplex. So we had 2 days to interact with all kinds of different students as well as their parents who are looking at getting into the skilled trades, and just showing them that some of their work can be applied to robotics in agriculture. So I think it was a pretty good event. Bridget, I don't know if you had anything else to add on to that.
No, you don't have to ever show them how to use a joystick on a robot. So that was as soon as you give it to them, they know exactly what they're doing. So almost sometimes too fast for it, but the Nio Oz is what we were letting them drive. We did bring the burro with us, but because it was such a larger group of people, we stopped using that one just when it was busy time. But they were definitely all really engaged, and may not necessarily be something you see in the next 6 months, but I think the goal with that event is to kind of get people aware of the different technologies that exist in agriculture so that a few years down the road, they're aware of other opportunities in skilled trades. So it was a good opportunity for us.
Actually, Thomas is representing us. He went to France to the NIO Dealer Summit, and so he's raising the Canadian flag in France for us right now.
Awesome. And then Bridget, I'll actually just I'll keep it on you for a second because we've got some update on the working group survey responses from the survey that went out recently, if you want to update folks on that.
Yeah, so I apologize that we're so late getting this to you. We had a few weeks where we just were a really good conversation, so it was always the last thing on the agenda, but we did get 31 responses from the survey that went out a few weeks ago regarding the working group. And for those that missed the survey, it was just asking in terms of the meeting content and the format and things like that, if it was of value to you. And one of the things that was identified from that survey is just having more, everyone does like the opportunity to hear from speakers and industry experts, but also having more opportunity for collaborative discussions similar to what we had this morning, just to give people that maybe are new to the industry a little bit more of an opportunity to have a voice, but also just to kind of talk about long-term or big picture ideas in regards to the AgRobotics project. and the ecosystem. So that is something that Dan and I will be incorporating into the speaking calendar moving forward. We do typically have about a 2-month lead time, so you may not see all those changes right away, but we did want to mention it to everybody. It was very appreciated for all the feedback that you gave. In terms of the rest of it, everyone did say that they found value in the meetings. And a few of you were making fun of the poll that we had at the beginning of the meeting. So one thing that came out for us is to just have a bit of an idea of the different representation that's on the group for our funding partners, but also just so we have an idea of making sure that we have enough representation from different areas. Obviously, if it's Chuck that doesn't fit in necessarily one bucket, we can definitely look at other options, but that's what that poll is there for. It's just so that we can kind of get a quick snapshot every week of who's actually attending from different areas. So thanks for your patience with that. Were there any questions about the survey responses? No. And I'll have Dan send out we can send some of the dials and things like that if you want to see them for next week in the actual agenda.
Perfect. Thanks, Bridget. With that, we don't have any new funding announcements or opportunities this week, but as always, please do check out the ones that we do have, and hopefully it can apply to you or someone you know. We also have our articles, so please check those out to keep up to date with what's going on in the industry. And with that, we are at time. So I'd like to thank everybody for joining us this week. Thank you all for the great discussion. I think we all got a lot out of it. There's a lot of good information and ideas flowing around. So we appreciate everyone participating. And we hope you all have yourselves a great weekend. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.